Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to Medieval Church History. I'm Teresa Holman, and with me is Father Michael Witt. Welcome, Father.
Thank you, Teresa.
We're beginning show number 19.
Number 19.
We've had a couple great weeks recently after we made the turn away from some of the nastiness for a while.
That's right.
And, how's today looking?
We're back to some challenges.
Okay.
We're going to be looking at the very unfortunate split that takes place in Christendom between the East and the West. 1054. It's important for us to look at that and see what happens. It really mars an otherwise incredible pontificate of Pope St. Leo the Ninth,
right.
And of course that, and then also his own death. Mar a wonderful pontificate, but neither one of those does he cause on his own.
Right.
Remember, one was the Normans simply were on the rampage, and
we talked about that last week and how he went in, to kind of end their rampaging.
And
then
didn't work.
They pretty much destroyed the army and then herald him back into Rome.
I know
that was so odd.
And then what we're going to see now, in this, not so much this program, but the program after, with another saint, another Pope Saint, Gregory the Seventh, we're going to see the Normans are the great allies to the Pope and help to bring about these reforms. They're the muscle behind the reformers. So it's just ironic as can be.
They love the Pope, but they want their land.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Well, we left off last time around with Pope Leo the Ninth, and at Benevento, he can't keep any food down. He is in terrible shape. He is, as you mentioned, escorted back to Rome by an honor guard of the Normans, the very people who had beaten him at the Battle of Civitate, and he will die there. While he is still in Benevento, on his deathbed, much of the kitchen cabinet that he had assembled is dispersed off in different places. Hildebrand of Sueno is up in France. He's at Tours at this particular time, so he's away from the Pope. Several of the others are over in Constantinople. They're on a mission, which we'll be talking about today. And with him, however, is Cardinal Humbert, and he receives a letter at that time while he's on his deathbed. He receives a letter from a bishop in Bulgaria. This is a Byzantine bishop. His name is Okrida, Bishop Okrida of Bulgaria. He writes this letter, writes it in Greek. There's a real problem because not many people could speak or read at that point in history both Latin and Greek. There had been over a long period of time just a breakdown, and it's a very sad commentary, really, on the on both sides, that there's scholars on both sides. Neither of them pursued the study of these great ancient languages, and as a result, he receives this letter. Pope Leo can't read Greek. Luckily, Cardinal Humbert does, but he's not all that terribly good. And so, think back to your high school French or Spanish, and if you got a letter in that language, you would be struggling through trying to translate the best you can. I'll read you part of that letter a little bit later on.
Okay.
But before we do that, we have to step back again in history. We have to look back at Bulgaria itself, because Bulgaria is in many ways a real contentious issue between Rome and Constantinople. Bulgaria, along with Moravia and Croatia, were originally brought to the faith by the works of two great saints of Eastern Europe, Saint Cyril and Methodius.
Wow.
And the Bulgarians themselves, when they converted, they wanted to be converted by Western Christians, not by the Eastern Christians. Now, that's a strange kind of request, but the reason for that was that particularly the king, or known as the Khan of Bulgaria, his name is Boris, was afraid of the Byzantine emperors. He was afraid that if he converted his nation to Christianity, and it was done through Constantinople, that the emperors would control. I mean, Bulgaria is not too far away from Constantinople, and his concern was that there would be this political control. So what he did instead was he sought an alliance with the Germans, so that they would convert basically through the Germans. And with that, then he contacts. This is back in the 800s.
Yeah.
And so we're still dealing with the Carolingians. He contacted Louis the German in 862 and asked for an alliance. Now, what happened was that Louis the German needed soldiers because he was fighting his brothers. You remember those ugly years?
Oh, my goodness, yes.
So he turns to Boris and says, fine, come to Germany. Bring your army with you, by the way, and you can prove yourself on the battlefield. So Boris does. But when he does, he basically takes the defense of his country away from his country, and this is an opportunity for the Byzantines to attack.
Okay.
And when they do, the Bulgarians, what's left behind, immediately enter into negotiations, and there's a peace settlement between the Byzantine Empire and Bulgaria, based upon the notion that Bulgaria would become Christian, but it would accept missionaries from the East rather than from the West. So you can see even here, even in the 800s, there's a rivalry between the East and West over the conversion of Eastern Europe.
Wow.
You know? Well, anyway, that's all just wonderful. The Pope at the time is Pope Nicholas, St. Nicholas the First, the Great, and he agrees with this, and so does King Boris. But within 3 years, Boris realizes he's made a mistake, because the Byzantines are sending their missionaries in, but they're also sending in delegates and begin basically telling him how to run his country. And he doesn't like this, and so he turns again to the Pope, and the Pope then sends 2 Western bishops to him. However, Nicholas dies in 867, and using that as an opportunity, the Byzantines then begin forcing their way into Bulgaria once again. In 879, the Emperor Basil installs as the patriarch a man who is very rabidly anti-Western. His name is Photius, and we're going to see some about him. This is a man who is very bright. Photius is a very, very bright man. He replaces a wonderful patriarch who had really tried to work very closely with Nicholas, and his name is Ignatius, the patriarch Ignatius. But at the time of his death, then, he is replaced by this up-and-comer, Photius, who believes in a very highly centralized church, but the center of the church for him is Constantinople. And he believes in a Caesaro-papal unity. That is to say that the emperor and the patriarch, working hand in glove, should run the universal church. So that's his vision, and obviously he is going to have a very different idea of apostolic succession, and certainly the Petrine doctrine. He plays word games in recognizing the Petrine superiority, that Peter, that is to say, the church in Rome, is the center of unity of the universal church. But in reality, the way he operates shows just the opposite of this.
He's not the one that sent that letter to the Pope.
No, he's not.
Okay.
But the Bishop of Bulgaria, this is a Byzantine bishop, did, and we have every reason to believe that this bishop was put up by Photius. Yeah,
okay.
Either Photius wrote it or he heavily influenced it.
Okay.
Yeah. He is one of the few who was able to read and write both Latin and Greek, and he used this as an opportunity to influence the emperor. At the time that the Pope found out about the death of the patriarch, he sent a letter. Now, this is one of the successors of Pope Nicholas, okay? So we're still back in the 800s. And he sends a letter over to the emperor in which he understands that Photius has been named the new patriarch. And he basically sends a letter to warn the emperor. Okay, I want to read you a little section of this. This, by the way, is done. This is from Warren Carroll's second volume, The History of Christendom, The Building of Christendom. And one of the things that Warren Carroll does here is he shows us the actual letter that the Pope had sent, and also the translation from Latin into Greek, which Photius does.
I was going to say, I'm guessing it wasn't accurately translated.
No, I just want to read you a paragraph, and both in what the Pope actually said, and then what Photius said the Pope said, and of course the subject is Photius. Okay, so the Pope writes this. He says, knowing that the Patriarch Ignatius has departed this life, and having considered all the circumstances mentioned in your letters, we decree that Photius may be forgiven whatever he is known to have done in the past, although he usurped functions that were forbidden him without reference to our see, and we decree this without prejudice to the apostolic statutes and the rules of the Holy Fathers. Rather do we act on the strength of those rules and their manifold authority. So here the Pope is saying, we know that Photius has done things he should not have done. We forgive him this, and we'll recognize him as the patriarch, okay? Now, this is what Photius tells the emperor the Pope had written. You'll love this. Okay? Accept this man, Photius, without hesitation. Let no one seek pretenses for refusal in the decisions of the iniquitous synods that had met against him. Let no one, as many simple people think that they can, appeal to the decrees of our blessed predecessors, Nicholas and Hadrian, for they never credited with what was alleged against the very saintly Photius. Let no one use your signature against him as a pretext to sever communion with him or with you. Everything is over, everything reputed, everything annulled, and whatever was done against him has lost all validity.
Oh my goodness!
I mean, this is brazen or what?
No kidding. It's like the obvious opposite that he could have given for the letter. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, incredible. So anyway, this is that Photius that we're talking about.
Woo.
And you know, and his sights are set on Bulgaria. He is going to convert Bulgaria to Photius Christianity. And so he finds a willing emperor in Basil II in particular. Basil II, by the way, in Bulgarian history is known as the Bulgar Slayer. He is guilty of nothing short of Bulgarian genocide. There's one case in which there was a battle between the Byzantines and the Bulgarian army. When the Bulgarian army was defeated, it surrendered. And Basil II had every man except one, every man blinded. In the whole Bulgarian army, everyone was blinded except one, so that he would lead them back home. This is a very, very cruel individual.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So now, when we come forward, we're going to be looking at the three schisms between the two churches. Later on, we'll say something about that, reflecting back again. But when we come up to the time in which we're talking about right now, we have yet another patriarch who is again very militant, very anti-Western, and another one who unfortunately for him, finds an emperor who is not like Basil II. He's much more willing to negotiate and to accommodate the West. Now, this particular patriarch is his name is Michael Cerullius,
Okay.
and he has seen the papacy in its doldrums, and he has seen the Reformation take place, and he has watched the pontificate. He's a contemporary with Saint Leo, Pope Saint Leo, and he has watched him pull together the Western Church again, and to overcome, or at least move toward overcoming feudalism. And he's jealous of this. He is not happy to see this happen, because when Rome is strong, Constantinople feels weak. And so Michael Cerullius then sees when Pope Leo is captured by the Normans, he sees this as an opportunity to exploit the new humiliation of the papacy. He himself becomes patriarch in 1043, and he uses everything he can to delegitimize. One of the things that I think is interesting is that, it's the questions of recognition, that the patriarchs in the West, the patriarchs in the East, in Constantinople, had not recognized the legitimacy of any pope in the West going all the way back to 1012. Now, as we've said, some of these guys that were put on the throne by those Italian families were not very good people.
Right.
But you can't deny the validity of their elections and, of their ordinations. But nonetheless, in the East, they had basically done that for a significant period of time, and Leo IX had reversed that role up until his capture. And now here was a moment of weakness. Here was an opportunity, and so that within that context, and within the context of the previous generation, the bad relations with Photius and all, Michael Cerullius then has this opportunity now to again pummel the Pope, and he does this through the letter that I had mentioned about in the beginning. Bishop Leo of Achrida of Bulgaria sends this letter and basically says these things. And now, keep in context also some of the other things that had been happening that Pope Leo was aware of when he receives this letter. He knew already that in Constantinople, Patriarch Michael Cerullius had forbade the use of unleavened bread at Mass, including the Latin Masses. And of course, even to this day, we use unleavened bread in our Eucharist. But even the Latin churches and the Latin chapels were forced to use leavened bread. We know that at one point he actually outlawed the Latin rite itself and insisted that the Mass be celebrated even in the Latin churches and Latin chapels. So we're talking in terms of, like, for instance, you might have the Venetian ambassador to Constantinople in his own chapel. He would have an Italian priest who would be saying Mass. He was forbidden to say Mass in Latin. He had to say Mass according to the Greek rite. This is pretty tough.
Yeah, it is.
And at one point, there's even a report, I don't know that it's substantiated, but there had been a report that soldiers had broken into one of the Latin churches and actually had been ordered to take the hosts from the tabernacle, to throw them on the ground, and to stomp on them.
Oh my gosh.
As a sign that they did not recognize the transubstantiation of unleavened bread. So this is how bad
This is terrible.
things. Yeah, this is how bad things had gotten between these two sides.
Oh,
so
my
in that
goodness.
context, here he gets this letter, and Cardinal Humbert is trying to translate it the best he can, and basically the letter begins by saying that unleavened bread is what he refers to as a Judaistic practice. Stop this. Don't do this. And he says to the following, listen to these words. This is a bishop writing to the Pope. He says this. He says, straighten yourself out. Correct your errors. Abandon unleavened bread and observance of the Sabbath to the Jews. Use meat with blood in it to the pagans and barbarians in order to put yourself in accord with us in true orthodoxy.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that something?
This is a letter sent to the Pope.
Yeah.
Oh,
From
wow.
a Byzantine bishop. Now, you can almost see Patriarch Michael Cyrilius' hand behind all of this. You know? What's going on here? What's in Michael Cyrilius' mind? And I think what it is if you step back and you try to get into his mind, you realize that from the very beginning of the church, there is this relationship. In the unity of the church, there's a special relationship between bishops and a particular relationship between the Bishop of Rome, we've already talked about this, and the other bishops, that there is this collegiality and there is this sense of the primacy. If nothing else, the Bishop of Rome is the first among equals. If nothing else. Everyone concedes that. And there had been what is sometimes referred to as the pentarchy of bishops. You have the bishops of the great dioceses, okay, throughout the earlier part of history. Number one, Rome, always number one, Rome. Along with that, Jerusalem. Remember the Jerusalem cross? It's got the big cross in the center and then the four crosses on the side. It's a pentarchy. You've got Jerusalem, Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, and then the latecomer, Constantinople. Okay. Well, let's be real. You know, when you get to 1000 AD, the fact of the matter is that Jerusalem now, for centuries, had been seized by the Muslims and is no longer a great church. Antioch, at one time, one of the second or third, I think third largest city in the Roman Empire, is now in the hands of the Muslims. You know, thank you, Caliph Omar. He did that one too, and is no longer a great Christian church. Alexandria. I mean, look at some of the early church fathers. My word, what came out of Alexandria. Alexandria now is a Muslim town. So of the five, there are only two now that are still remaining as great Christian churches, Rome and Constantinople. And so in a real sense, you could see from Michael Cyrilius' point of view that there is no longer a pentarchy, but rather a diarchy, just the two. And there's always an inferiority complex among the Byzantines. I mean, Rome... And they can't get away from the fact that Byzantium was a tiny little fishing village that Constantine then built into this great city, which he named after himself.
Right.
Okay? But in the back of their mind, they still hear, and even today we still use this term from time to time. You hear it even in the West, Roma locuta est, right? Rome has spoken.
Sure.
Yeah. The phrase actually goes like this: Roma locuta, res decida, causa finita. Rome has spoken, the thing has been decided, the cause is finished. Yeah, that's it. And so you might be sitting over in Constantinople, and you might have all the power, you might have the army, you might have the navy, you might have all the great law books of Justinian and all of that, but the history still reminds us that Rome speaks. Well, you got that. Second, realistically, there have been a number of times throughout early church history when the Patriarch of Constantinople came down on the wrong side of doctrine. You know, we've seen some of those already. The Monophysites or Monophysites,
right.
The Monothelicites. Okay, there are a number of times when he caves. There are also some great patriarchs that don't cave too. We can't forget about John Chrysostom and any number of others. But there are other times that they caved. That's never been true of the Roman Pontiff. The Roman Pontiff has always. There are a couple moments when you kind of wish that these guys weren't who they were. But some of those darn Roman families. But you'd never find them preaching heterodoxy.
That's what I was going to say. But they never taught.
They never do. Yeah.
Right.
they keep their mouth shut if nothing else, but they don't. Yeah, and so there is that's another that's just in the craw. And the other thing too that really Michael Cerullius can't forget. He'd love to, I'm sure. He can't forget is that in the Council of Constantinople, in the third canon, the Council Fathers raise up Byzantium using this phrase. Pardon my Greek here. I'll do the best I can, okay? Metaton tes Romanes episcopon. In position of honor after the Bishop of Rome.
Okay.
Now, you can interpret the term after the Bishop of Rome in two ways.
Okay.
The one way that certainly we in the West would say is that the place of honor goes first to the Bishop of Rome and then secondly to the Patriarch of Constantinople. He is honored after the Bishop of Rome. That's the place of honor. Michael Cerullius, on the other hand, sees this as being chronological. Okay, not honorific, but chronological, meaning that the Bishop of Rome had the place of honor first, but now, after the Bishop of Rome, now the Patriarch of Constantinople has that. That is a novel interpretation of that term?
I would say.
Okay.
You'd have trouble, I would think, getting a good deal of people to read it as he is.
Yes, yes. But
But
from his point of view,
it makes perfect sense to him, so I understand.
yes, that's right. The other thing, too, is that in the craw, and it's going to be in the craw of the Patriarch, and it has been now for almost 200 years, and also in the craw of the Emperor also, is what happened at the beginning of this series. The crowning of Charlemagne.
Right.
They're never going to forget that. They're never going to forgive that. The very fact that the Pope looks to a Frank as being an emperor is simply not going to be acceptable on the part of the Byzantine emperor. He sees himself. The Byzantine emperor is not just a Greek emperor. He sees himself as the inheritor of the Roman Empire. Constantine moved to Constantinopolis. Constantine moved to Byzantium. The emperor in the east is the emperor. And when that Western emperor in 476 gave up his purple robes to those Germanic barbarians, the empire in the west died. As far as the east is concerned, it died, and you cannot recreate it. But Pope Leo III did exactly that, and he could get away with that, and Charlemagne could get away with that in 800 because if you remember, over in the east there was evil Irene who was running things. Remember, she had blinded and killed her son.
And
right. She claimed the title of emperor, not empress, but emperor.
Right.
And that went on for 2 years until finally her own. I think it was another son,
I believe it was.
Son. Yeah. Nicephorus went ahead and overthrew her. And then he turns his attention to the west and he says the following. This is a quote that's going to be buzzing in everybody's ears. You Romans have separated yourself from the church. Wow. So two very, very different things.
Very different.
And then when you start looking at Bulgaria, when that gets into the equation, again, listen to this. Another quote. It is completely inappropriate for you who have rejected the Greek Empire and united yourselves in union with the Franks should preserve any right of jurisdiction in our empire. Our empire, meaning Bulgaria. And again, again, look at Photius himself. And this is a little quote I came up with in a translation by Thomas Herman, St. Louisan. It's a wonderful book. I really recommend it to anybody. It's called The History of the Christian Church Until the Great Schism of 1054. And it was written by Mikhail Poznov. And at the turn of the century, the first part of the 20th century, and I believe this led, if I remember correctly, this led to his conversion to Roman Catholicism. But in the book itself, he has this particular quote again, showing the arrogance of the patriarchs in the East. He says, this is Photius saying this: "The See of Constantinople, which brings glory to the capital city, is recognized as primary in the decrees of consuls."
But that's not accurate.
No, see, that's that after thing. Okay. "As a consequence of this, the divine law ordains that other bishops who are in disagreement come for judgment to the See of Constantinople. Every patriarch must be concerned with the metropolitans, bishops, monasteries, and churches, and equally with overseeing and judging conflicts. However, the Patriarch of Constantinople is allowed, even in other sees where churches are not yet blessed, to give an independent status, and moreover to review and correct those persons involved in controversies in other sees." This is an authority that is reserved in the West only to Rome. And now what he's asserting here is that this authority is at least applicable to those of the Byzantine obedience, if not the universal church. Now, he can't enforce the universal church. There's no way that Photius or Michael Cyrilius is going to go to the Diocese of York in England, and obviously not. But Bulgaria is one of those overlap areas. And not only that, and this is where it becomes really important, is that remember those Normans who had taken over Sicily? And remember they drove out the Muslim control. There's still Muslims living there, living in peace with Christians side by side. But the Normans take over. They take over not only Sicily, but also much of southern Italy. And when they do, they take over the churches and the monasteries. Remember, that's why Pope Leo was so upset with them. But what they did was they then demanded obedience from these bishops and abbots in those dioceses and in those monasteries. And they then replaced these bishops and abbots who were in obedience to the Patriarch of Constantinople. They replaced them with Latins instead.
Okay.
So that, for instance, when a bishop of a diocese, let's say in southern Italy, dies or retires or whatever, the Normans who are there have they use their influence to have them named a bishop who is a Latin bishop rather than a Greek bishop. So the influence of the Byzantines in southern Italy and in Sicily then is eroded, and again you can see where Michael Cyrilius is very upset because he's losing diocese after diocese and monastery after monastery. What really upsets him on top of this is that when he turns to the new emperor in Constantinople, he does not have someone who is, he's no Basil II. Instead, he wants to have closer relations with Rome. And his name is Monomachus, the Emperor Monomachus. Constantine Monomachus, and his vision is to ally with the Pope, with Leo the Ninth.
Okay, so Leo. Okay.
Yeah. So the Emperor Constantine Monomachus would then ally with Pope Leo against the Normans.
Okay.
And that at that point it looks pretty good. So what happens then is that on his deathbed, Pope Leo dispatches 3 individuals to try to bring about a better understanding between Michael Cyrilius and the papacy. And these 3 are they're top flight. They're the best he could send. He ends up sending Humbert.
Okay.
Okay, Bishop Humbert. he is as much as you're going to find anybody in the West, he's a scholar of Greek. At least, he can read it and write it and all. He sends along with him Friedrich of Liège, who is also fluent in Greek. And then he sends a bishop he's the Archbishop of Amalfi. And it's assumed that he spoke Greek also. The reason for that is that Amalfi is a port city, does a lot of trade in the Eastern Mediterranean, and the Italians of Amalfi are pretty fluent in Greek in order to. So if you're going to find a city where Greek is going to be understood, Amalfi is probably it, and probably Archbishop would be. So those are three good. So you got three good language people, okay? However, they also go over with a bad attitude.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Basically, once again, get in their minds. They think, probably rightly so, that Michael Cerullius is going to play hardball. Yes, he is. His goal, undoubtedly, is the diarchy. So he's going to go on over. At least he's going to demand that there are two sides to Christendom, the West and the East, and you keep out of the East, I'll keep out of the West, and we'll go from there. That's it. That's the least position he would have. He might press even harder than that, especially with the Pope dying. He might press even harder than that and claim that that Peter had left Antioch to go to Rome. Now Peter leaves Rome to come to Constantinople. He might even claim that. So these guys realize this, that they're going to be playing hardball with this guy. So they take on a hardball attitude themselves. And so when they come on over, the idea is to talk nice, but to show superiority of this papal delegation. And so they're going to act tough, talk nice and act tough. That's the idea. Now, they get to, as they're heading toward Constantinople, they get to a monastery, a Byzantine monastery, where they stay over for a couple days, resting as they continue the journey. This particular monastery has a theologian in this monastery who has written already historical tracts in which he has claimed that, just what I just said, that when Peter left Antioch and went to Rome, Peter now leaves Rome and goes to Constantinople. And so they decided to have a little entertainment that night, and they had a debate between this monk, he's a Studite monk, with Hubert. And so the two of them had this debate over the papal authority, over Petrine doctrine. And by the end of the evening, this monk recognized his mistakes and is called on the carpet for him, and he apologizes, and then ceremonially the delegates then take his book. Now remember that these are all handwritten books. There's not no printing, and they take the book into the courtyard, the monastery courtyard, and ceremonially burn the book.
Wow.
This is the monk, the author of the book himself, does this, and so you can imagine that as they're heading down to Constantinople, these three feel pretty good about themselves. You know, they've just taken on the biggest theologian and convinced him, brought him over to their side. So they get down to Constantinople, and Michael Cerullius welcomes them. Oh, with a holy kiss. Ooh, we're so happy to have you. We're having a city synod of all the bishops and priests of the city. We would love to have you as guests. The three of them, well, that's wonderful, that's great. So when they arrive at the synod in this great cathedral, they're given 3 chairs in the back behind everybody else. It was a slap in the face. There are attempts at negotiating. It's pretty obvious that Michael Cerullius is not interested in negotiations. He's not interested in talking. He's interested in telling. And the two sides are just simply at loggerheads. And finally, well, we regret this moment that it happened, but it did happen. On July 15th of 1054, the 3 delegates, having not been able to press their case, full of frustration, barged in on a Saturday worship, barged into the Hagia Sophia, the cathedral,
Holy Church, yeah.
the cathedral of Constantinople. They marched in right in the middle of the service. The three of them, everyone was shocked. The three of them mounted the pulpit and then delivered a sermon against the Patriarch Michael Cyrilius, who was sitting right there in the cathedra, in the chair itself. With that little sermon, and you can imagine all these Greeks with their mouths open. Who are these guys that do that? And then with that, the three of them went over to the main altar and took a bull of excommunication, papal bull of excommunication, slapped it down on the altar and stormed out. And as they got to the door, the back door of the Hagia Sophia, they took their shoes and brushed the dust off their shoes. Now, if
Not good for communication.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. What was that one movie? All we have here is a failure to communicate.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. When Michael Cyrilius went over to look at the bull, it made him all the more angry. It was written in Latin.
Of course.
Yes. The other thing, too, is quite honestly, this could not have been a bull of, and this, I think, we come to the point now where, once we realize the difficulties, once we understand the attempts that are being made, even to this day, of reconciling the two churches, and the history is going to get uglier. When we get to the Fourth Crusade, it is just embarrassing. But as we look at the history, we look at it objectively and honestly on both sides,
sure.
and realize
both
that there's
sides.
Both. We let human personalities get in the way of the message of Jesus Christ. And the other thing too, honestly, is that this papal bull of excommunication, this thing is issued on July 15th. Okay, the Pope died on April 19th. So
there's a little problem.
Yes, it obviously can't be a bull of excommunication in that same sense.
Right.
Well, the Emperor Constantine is all upset. He begs the three delegates to come back. They've already traveled a couple days off. He begs them to come back. He promises them an armed guard. He promises that Michael Cyrilius will meet with them. He doesn't want to see this thing end this way. And so they do. The three of them come back. The Patriarch refuses to meet with them. And after a couple days, there are riots in the city. These things are fomented by none other than Michael Cyrilius.
Sure.
And fearing for their lives, they flee back to Italy.
Oh.
On July 20th, Michael Cyrilius excommunicated all those who were associated with the bull of excommunication against him. Mm-hmm. And so now begins the third schism between the East and the West. There had been two previous ones. We've already talked about the one with Photius, and that went on for a number of years. There had been a previous one before that in 482, which caused a breakdown between the two churches that lasted about 35 years. And that had to do with the emperor trying to control religious matters in the West, and the Pope standing against that. But now this is the one. This is the one everyone thought would last a couple years. Michael Cyrilius won't live forever. Mm-hmm. Leo is already dead. The other three, reconciliation. But it is irreconcilable. It doesn't. It doesn't heal itself. And historians since then have wondered why. Why is this? Because doctrinally, there's no difference doctrinally. Certainly the Church in the West recognizes the apostolic succession of Eastern bishops. We recognize the validity of their sacraments. We are a hair's breadth away from full reconciliation. And so you look and say, well, why? And the answer is that there are these little irreconcilable differences that all we have to do is just reconcile them. And, language. Oh, come on.
Yeah, right. Come on, because we're in a time where so many languages are
Yeah.
used.
Yeah. And so that whole Latin
It doesn't
versus
make
Greek
sense.
thing doesn't make sense anymore. That's anachronistic. Governmental, so there are two empires. There aren't two empires today. Byzantine Empire has been gone for centuries. The Holy Roman Empire has been gone for centuries. So, that doesn't make any sense anymore either. Theological, there's the filioque controversy. I don't know. I think that could be understood.
Sure.
Then you have what they refer to as Western deviations. But once again, there's been a lot of serious work done on the history of these so-called deviations. For instance, clerical celibacy.
Right.
All the work that's been done, certainly in the last 20 or 40 years, has shown that clerical celibacy has been with us from the apostolic time, and that the deviation actually takes place at the Council of Trullo. Mm-hmm. And we understand clearly today that this is a discipline within the church. This is something the church in the West asks of her priest.
Right.
But the church does not ask the priest in the East.
Exactly.
Okay,
right.
So this is something that the church has simply requested. It is not doctrinal.
Right.
And we understand that, although quite honestly, a lot of Catholics don't understand that.
They still don't. I know it's still, but then again, I hate to use the word stupidity because I hate that word, but our lack of education on our own part. It's not. Yeah. It's nothing else.
That's very sad. But maybe we can help on that.
Yes,
doing these radio programs.
Exactly.
But so clerical celibacy is not an issue. Not really.
Right. It shouldn't be at all.
No. At the time, there was a question of fasting. Now today, not even today, barely within the memory of Catholics today, we remember Friday fasts. Mm-hmm. Earlier, 1,000 years ago, there was a Saturday fast in the West, but not in the East. Okay, but that's not that's not even a deal anymore. The observance of Easter Sunday calendar. Now, even to this day, we operate out of the Jewish calendar, that we look at the spring equinox, mm-hmm. and then we count the next the Sunday following the first full moon and we're in the West, we're very closely engaged with the Jewish Passover.
Right.
That's why the Passover and the Western Easter often coincide. Mm-hmm. Right. In the East, they operate out of a different function. And quite honestly, I've talked to a number of Greek or Eastern Orthodox priests, and they're not happy with their Easter, because sometimes, because of the cycles, sometimes their Easters are incredibly late. I think it was last year or the year before, it was into May.
Oh,
and so it throws things off. But anyway, once again...
But again, that seems like something we could easily reconcile.
Oh, yeah. And so the bottom line is personalities.
We have to get past the pride of...
It was.
Tradition.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with tradition, because tradition is extremely important, but that doesn't mean that we can't work out the differences between the East and the West and maintain some of our own traditions and still not operate together.
And even the word tradition itself, we're talking about small T traditions.
Small T tradition.
We share
definitely.
the big T tradition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
so.
we can only hope.
Right. And we know the efforts that our beloved Pope John Paul II worked for, and it seems already that Pope Benedict has made this a goal for himself as well.
Right.
So hopefully, cooler heads prevail, and Emperor Constantine Monomachus's dream will also be fulfilled.
Except for the attacking the Normans thing. The Normans are good guys now. Anyhow, there it is.
Right.
There's the schism, and Pope Leo dies. They've got to go on, and so you have the church in the West beginning again to elect a new pope again the emperor at this time, the man who had orchestrated, in a sense, the election of Pope Leo. Remember, he's the one that had turned to Bishop Bruno of Toul, and he becomes this great reforming pope that we've had. Now the question is who's going to be the next pope? Who's going to continue this on? And the Emperor Henry III, Henry the Black, turned his attention to the papacy, turned his attention to reform, and again sends down to Rome a suggestion. And when an emperor sends a suggestion, it's a pretty strong suggestion. Sends the name of a bishop, a German bishop. Again, he seems to trust Germans, and he suggests Bishop Gebhard of Eichstätt. Okay. Gebhard of Eichstätt is not happy to hear his name.
Oh, no.
He wants to stay in Eichstätt, you know. Germans love Germany. Why do you want to go to Rome for a visit, a pilgrimage, a vacation, get a tan, but don't stay there.
It's hot down there.
It's hot down there. That's right. And Germans sometimes don't do well in heat, and so it was with him. In the fall of 1054, he makes his way down to Rome. He is elected by the priests of Rome, takes the title of Victor II, and there are just lots of problems. He's not Leo, and so he finds himself constantly dealing with issues and all. Henry III himself begins to do some rather heavy-handed things. He exiles the Duke of Lorraine. Now, the Duke of Lorraine's brother is Friedrich of Liège, remember?
Oh,
and
that's right.
Yeah, and he had been in that kitchen cabinet with the Pope Leo. He was one of those who had gone to Constantinople. He's one of the delegates. He's come back from Constantinople, and he himself is then exiled by the emperor and sent off to Monte Cassino.
Henry is?
This is Friedrich of Liège.
Friedrich is, okay.
Simply because he's the brother of the Duke of Lorraine,
okay.
And so it's kind of a clean sweep kind of a deal. And so he's sent off. He is made the abbot of Monte Cassino, but still he's restricted there. So you have the removal now of one of the other reformers, someone who could have been an advisor and a help to Victor II. Also, one of the great women of this era is Beatrice of Tuscany, and her daughter Matilda. And the two of them are great supporters of the papacy. And Henry turns around and imprisons both of them. And then he dies. Henry dies. His son is little Hank Jr., and he's a little child. He will become Henry IV. His regent is his mother. This is the Empress Agnes. This is that wonderful holy woman who, Agnes of Poitou, who had married as the second wife of Henry III, had helped to bring more Cluniac influence into Germany. That's right, and so now she is overseeing the education of her son. And then Victor dies. Victor II, the Pope, dies. As the cardinals gathered, I'm sorry, there are no cardinals at this time. As the priests of Rome gathered together to elect a new Pope, this is in 1057. They look to Friedrich of Liège, the abbot of Monte Cassino, the former member of the kitchen cabinet, the former delegate, and they elect him. And it's through that election that he's freed to leave Monte Cassino and now come back to Rome. He chooses the title Stephen IX.
Stephen IX. Okay.
He does this only very reluctantly. Interestingly enough, most of these reformers have no interest in becoming Pope themselves. They have the highest sense of the papacy, and maybe in that they recognize their own personal unworthiness. But he does finally accept it, except he's very, very ill. And he sends word to Aachen, to Germany, of his election, and he sends Hildebrand of Suena up to the little child emperor to let him know, or the king, to let him know of his election. But on the way, Pope Stephen, Friedrich of Liège, dies. He didn't last very long at all. Now is the opportunity for the anti-reform group to jump in. You know, you've got the two women from Tuscany who are, I think, still in prison, or at least they're out of town. You have the reformers. Leo is already dead. Friedrich has just died. Pope Stephen. Hildebrand is out of town. So there isn't much there anymore that's going to be able to stop them. And so the families attempt to come back in, and what they do is they orchestrate the election real quick of one of their own who takes the title Benedict X. Now the reformers race back to Italy. And they gather in Tuscany, basically in Florence, and refuse to accept this backslide, and refuse to accept this so-called Benedict X as their pope, and instead they put up their own candidate, and that's going to be the Bishop of Florence, who is actually not Italian. He's actually Burgundian, and he is a reformer.
Okay.
And he takes the title Nicholas II. Now, we have a situation in which there are two popes. Mm-hmm. You have the one who is placed on the throne because of an Italian family, mm-hmm. not legitimately elected. And then you have you have the Reformed Pope Nicholas. So you got Benedict X.
So Benedict X was not formally elected.
That's correct.
Okay, he was just placed there by the
families.
Okay.
Then you have, but see how fluid this is. Then you have Nicholas II, who is elected by the reformers, who are members of the clergy of Rome. But he's elected in Florence, not in Rome.
Okay.
So it's a question of, do you have to have a conclave in Rome in order to be a legitimate conclave?
Right.
And the answer that they come up with here is no. Anyway, who's going to decide this? The Normans.
Oh.
The Normans are going to come in, and they're going to side with the reformers.
Uh-huh.
And with that, then Nicholas is made is recognized as Pope. He settles into Rome, and he calls a consul at the Lateran. This is in April of 1059, and at this point he issues what's called the Electoral Decree of 1059, and Teresa, this is where the College of Cardinals is established.
All right.
I know we're running short on time,
we are,
so
but
next time around we can go ahead and talk about the importance to the universal church. This is one of the great reforms.
This is big.
Yeah, really big reforms of church history, and it's Nicholas II who pulls this off.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Father. This is great. And like I said, hopefully we will see an end to this East and West problem soon.
Yeah.
So we close with prayer. Yes.
Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be,
world without end. Amen.
May Almighty God bless you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Thank you, Father.
Okay.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.